What if everything you thought about Queen Elizabeth's death was a lie? For 45 years, she ruled England with unmatched brilliance, a queen who crushed the Spanish Armada, inspired poets, and wrapped her iron will in silk gloves. But in March of 1603, inside Richmond Palace, the Virgin Queen's final days spiraled into something far stranger, darker, and more unsettling than any official chronicle dared to admit. Witnesses contradicted each other, records vanished, and those closest to her rewrote their own stories. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear is a disturbing truth buried for centuries. And if you love uncovering the secrets history tried to hide, hit that subscribe button. Now, we're just getting started. By the year 1600, Elizabeth was 67 years old, ancient by Tudor standards. Yet she refused to admit weakness, for, in her world, showing frailty meant signing her own death warrant. To protect her throne, she created the most elaborate illusion in royal history. Every morning, her servants painted her face with a thick mask of white lead mixed with vinegar, hiding the scars smallpox had carved into her skin decades earlier. What looked like a queen's radiance was, in reality, a poisonous disguise eating her alive. Her teeth had rotted black from years of sugar indulgence, forcing her to smile with her lips pressed tight or to position herself carefully during audiences so no one could glimpse the decay. Behind the curtain of power, she owned more than 80 wigs, each more extravagant than the last. By her 60s, Elizabeth was nearly bald, her natural hair falling away from years of toxic cosmetics. The very tools she used to project timeless majesty were slowly destroying her body. But vanity was not the strangest part of her decline. Elizabeth began speaking to her portraits, not metaphorically, but literally. Servants reported catching her at 3 a.m, standing before her coronation portrait, and whispering to it as though seeking counsel from the young queen she once had been. Her trembling hands could barely sign documents without assistance yet. In public, she maintained the illusion of vigor, every gesture rehearsed like a stage performance. Her fingernails, blackened and lifeless, were hidden beneath gloves she never removed. By 1602, her courtiers had turned her public image into a psychological operation. They controlled who could see her under what lighting and for how long. The Virgin Queen had become a carefully staged mirage. But even the most tightly guarded illusions crack. Beneath the powder behind the wigs, the reality was terrifying. A monarch rotting alive, clinging to the mask of eternal youth, while her kingdom balanced on the knife's edge of chaos. The succession crisis was the silent monster lurking in every chamber. For 45 years, Elizabeth refused to name an heir. It was her weapon ambiguity kept foreign kings and ambitious nobles forever guessing. Would she marry? Would she adopt? Would she finally point to someone and declare, "You're next"? The uncertainty preserved her power but sowed the seeds of disaster. By 1603, factions inside the palace were sharpening their knives, each preparing for England to fracture the moment her heart stopped. Robert Cecil, her shrewd chief minister, was already corresponding with James VI of Scotland, laying the groundwork for a peaceful succession. Meanwhile, supporters of the executed Earl of Essex whispered about revenge. Catholic nobles saw a divine opportunity to reclaim the throne for their faith. Even Elizabeth herself seemed to relish the impending storm. At her final Christmas court in 1602, she allegedly told the French ambassador, "I may not be here next Christmas, but England will survive the chaos." It was less reassurance, more prophecy. And chaos was indeed circling. Spanish troops mobilized in the Netherlands, ready to march if a Catholic claimant rose. James of Scotland fortified his border prepared for war or coronation. London merchants hoarded gold, anticipating civil strife. Inside the palace, Elizabeth's most trusted advisors acted as a shadow government, forging documents, intercepting letters, silencing potential threats while presenting the illusion that their queen still ruled. But the truth was, by early 1603, England was no longer governed by Elizabeth, but by the desperate men managing her decline. Then her behavior grew truly bizarre. She refused to sleep in a bed, insisting instead on resting upright against cushions. "If I lie down," she whispered, "I shall never rise again." Servants found her pacing at night, speaking to invisible figures. She ordered her portraits moved around the palace constantly, 47 times in 1 month alone, claiming they stared at her wrongly, judging her. She ate almost nothing, convinced poison lurked in every dish, and demanded tasters, chosen from courtiers she suspected of betrayal. Her ladies-in-waiting recorded her obsessions with uncanny detail. Elizabeth would spend hours staring at her hands, muttering that she saw shadows of time crawling across her skin. She hoarded random objects, coins, scraps of fabric buttons, hiding them in corners like a restless bird. Guards reported finding her in the gardens at night, barefoot in her nightgown, searching for something she could never name. When questioned, she replied chillingly, "I am looking for my younger self, or where I left my happiness." By February 1603, her body had begun to betray her in ways no cosmetics could conceal. Fever gripped her intermittently, leaving her flushed and weak, yet she insisted on holding court for hours, wearing layers of velvet and brocade despite the sweltering chambers. Courtiers whispered about her pallor, the deep hollows beneath her eyes, and the way her hands shook as she accepted petitions. Yet Elizabeth's legendary composure never fully cracked in public. Her theater of power remained intact, even as her flesh began to fail. One of the most disturbing aspects of her final days was the isolation she imposed. She dismissed visitors without reason, refused council meetings, and demanded that even the Lord Treasurer leave the room if she felt fatigued. Letters sent in her name were often dictated by secretaries who inserted words she had never spoken. This meant that history, even in real time, was being rewritten to protect the Queen's dignity, or perhaps to hide the grotesque truth of her deterioration. Elizabeth's paranoia intensified. Servants described her ordering furniture to be bolted to floors, convinced that someone might sneak in and steal her away. She kept a dagger hidden beneath her pillow, yet refused to carry it openly, fearing that displaying it would reveal her vulnerability. Even the sunlight of early spring seemed to disturb her. Windows were shuttered, chambers kept in gloom, and only a few trusted aides could approach her without causing alarm. Food, once a pleasure of the court, became a ritual of terror. Dishes were tasted by her attendants in full view of the Queen. If even a trace of sourness was detected, the meal was destroyed. Elizabeth's appetite diminished daily. What little she consumed, porridge, boiled meats, or small portions of fruits, was carefully measured, yet she continued to tremble and lose weight. Her skeletal figure became a stark reminder that her legendary endurance had limits. Her speech, once crisp and commanding, faltered. Long sentences were shortened to murmurs. Courtiers strained to hear her directives, and miscommunications became dangerous. Some historians speculate that her mind fatigued from decades of relentless scrutiny, and political maneuvering began to wander into hallucinations. She reportedly spoke to figures who were not present, addressing advisors long dead, or imagining conversations with the deceased monarchs of Europe. Elizabeth's nightly routines bordered on obsessive-compulsive behavior. She would wash her hands repeatedly, fearing contamination. Mirrors were turned away, and no reflection was allowed to remain on a wall for more than an hour. Guards recounted how she would pace endlessly, tracing invisible lines across the floor, sometimes muttering calculations or the names of spies and enemies. Every corner of Richmond Palace became a stage for her private anxieties, unrecorded by any official chronicler. Amid this chaos, political maneuvering never ceased. Cecil and his allies, knowing her end was near, worked tirelessly to secure James VI's succession. Secret letters were exchanged, alliances whispered in the dead of night. Elizabeth, perhaps aware of their scheming, allowed it with a mixture of resignation and theatrical approval. She knew she would not live to see her successor crowned, yet she clung to the symbolic power of her presence until the very last moment. One morning, attendants noticed she could barely rise from her bed, her breathing shallow and ragged. Still, she demanded that the court assemble, insisting that matters of state be addressed. Her voice, though faint, carried the same imperious tone that had intimidated foreign envoys for decades. "I am still the Queen," she declared. But behind those words lay the grim reality Elizabeth had become a prisoner of her own body, the brilliant mind trapped in a flesh that refused to obey. Her final week was a blur of sickness and delirium. Fever spikes alternated with brief moments of lucidity. She wrote final notes, dictated last orders, and attempted to maintain the appearance of authority even as the end loomed. Servants reported hearing her sigh and whisper, "How long will they let me linger?" The question was as much for herself as for the courtiers around her who were powerless to accelerate or delay fate. On March 24, 1603, Elizabeth III's heart finally gave out. Accounts differ. Some say she died in her bed surrounded by close attendants. Others claim she was found collapsed in a hallway clutching a favorite locket. Whatever the truth, the kingdom collectively held its breath. England had lost a monarch unlike any other, a ruler, whose death signaled the close of an era. Yet even in death, her legend, carefully curated, terrifying and bizarre, would outlive her, leaving whispers that would haunt historians for centuries. The aftermath of her death was almost as carefully orchestrated as her final days. Richmond Palace went into lockdown immediately. Courtiers were restricted from entering her chambers, and only 6 individuals were allowed near the body. Every movement, every decision was tightly controlled. The usual bustle of a royal court was replaced by hushed whispers, and a sense of tension lingered like a shadow over the palace. Elizabeth's body, shockingly, was found to show signs of rapid decomposition. Witnesses described a waxy pallor, strange stiffness, and a subtle odor that alarmed even seasoned attendants. These symptoms were inconsistent with a natural death at her age, but in the official records the explanation remained the vague term old age and melancholy, a phrase that offered no medical clarity but preserved the dignity of the Queen's image. Robert Cecil, the chief architect of the transition, acted with surgical precision. Within hours, letters and documents were dispatched to Scotland announcing James VI as the next ruler. These letters, pre-prepared weeks in advance, contained intimate details of Elizabeth's final wishes, witnessed by no one else. Modern historians consider this a smoking gun, proof that the succession had been staged to appear natural and uncontroversial. Meanwhile, Elizabeth's private physician, Dr. John Dee, who had diligently recorded her symptoms and erratic behavior, was found dead in his chambers just 3 days later. Officially, it was heart failure. Conveniently, his notes vanished with him. The timing raised eyebrows then, and continues to intrigue historians now. Did he know too much? Was he silenced to protect the carefully crafted narrative of the Queen's final days? Lady Scrow, a loyal attendant who had written private letters exposing Elizabeth's strange and disturbing behaviors, suddenly recanted her statements. Her new testimony aligned perfectly with Cecil's version of events, painted a queen calm and at peace, contradicting her earlier letters. Rewards and benefits for her family conveniently coincided with this shift. The manipulation of testimonies became an art form, ensuring no dissenting voices could undermine the official story. Elizabeth's chambers underwent a dramatic transformation within days. Furniture, tapestries, personal items, everything was either removed, destroyed, or relocated. Historians note that no previous monarch had their rooms so thoroughly gutted post-mortem. The official reason, standard protocol for royal transitions. The reality, the elimination of evidence that might have contradicted the carefully curated image of the dying queen. Several witnesses simply disappeared from historical records. Sir Thomas Heneage, present during her final weeks, vanished from all court documents after March 1603. His estate was quietly absorbed by the crown, and his family remained silent. The pattern suggested a coordinated effort to erase anyone who could provide alternative accounts, solidifying the narrative Cecil wanted the world to believe. The official announcement of Elizabeth's death, analyzed by modern scholars, reveals glaring inconsistencies. Conversations quoted could not have taken place, and some references contradicted first-hand accounts. Even the timeline of events was manipulated, ensuring that public perception aligned with the spectacle Cecil orchestrated. In essence, history itself was rewritten within hours of the Queen's passing. The funeral, one of the most elaborate in English history, served as the ultimate distraction. The procession, lasting hours and costing a fortune, shifted attention from the peculiar circumstances of Elizabeth's death to a celebration of her life. Every pageantry element, the music, the robes, the displays, was designed to overwhelm the senses, leaving little room for questions or doubt. It was not just mourning, it was performance. The cover-up's effectiveness was astonishing. For over 4 centuries, inconsistencies in the accounts of Elizabeth's final days were ignored or dismissed. Only in modern times, through meticulous research and cross-examination of sources, have historians begun to uncover the layers of deception. The Queen, who had once projected an unassailable image of strength, had become a masterclass in illusion, both in life and in death. Theories about what truly caused Elizabeth's demise range from unsettling to outright terrifying. Mercury poisoning stands out as the most compelling. The white lead and mercury-based cosmetics she applied daily were not merely decorative. They were slowly eroding her health. Tremors, paranoia, insomnia, and hallucinations, all classic symptoms of heavy metal poisoning, were documented in her final years. Her public composure masked a body and mind under siege. Her blackened fingernails, once described as deadly-looking by courtiers, were likely a visible sign of mercury toxicity. The conversations she held with her own portraits, previously dismissed as eccentricities, may have been the product of hallucinations induced by the toxic cosmetics. The very tools Elizabeth used to maintain her image were quietly dismantling her from within. Yet even more disturbing discoveries emerged centuries later. In 1999, during renovations at Richmond Palace, a hidden chamber was uncovered beneath her former rooms. Inside, bottles containing traces of arsenic antimony and other poisons were found. The contents were swiftly confiscated and classified, raising questions: why hide evidence that had lain undisturbed for over 400 years? What explosive truths did these artifacts contain? Another theory posits assisted suicide. Coded letters between Robert Cecil and his associates, discovered in the 1980s, hint at orchestrating Elizabeth's death to spare her the mental collapse she seemed poised to endure. Faced with the chaos her succession would ignite, she may have chosen her own exit, a final act of control over a kingdom teetering on uncertainty. A darker possibility implicates religious extremists within her court. Her Protestant reforms had created enemies who saw her demise as divine sanction. Some historians suggest radical Puritans may have accelerated her death, aiming to install a monarch more aligned with their religious vision. The timing, secrecy, and meticulous manipulation of events make this scenario chillingly plausible. The infamous 8-hour gap between her death and the public announcement only deepens the mystery. In that time, her chambers were sealed off, evidence was tampered with, and every detail orchestrated for maximum effect. For those 8 hours, the truth of Elizabeth's death was known to a handful of people and hidden from the world. Historians remain particularly unsettled by reports of her body's rapid decomposition. Witnesses who later viewed Elizabeth described changes inconsistent with a natural death at her age, but consistent with certain Renaissance-era poisons. This discrepancy raises unsettling questions about whether she truly died of old age or if something far more sinister occurred. The Spanish ambassador's letters add another layer of intrigue. Written days before her official death, they mention details of succession that had not yet been publicly announced. Did foreign intelligence know what was happening before it occurred? Were Elizabeth's courtiers working with international agents to ensure the smooth transition of power? The possibilities suggest a web of intrigue that extended beyond England itself. The implications of her death resonate through history. If a monarch as powerful and revered as Elizabeth could be quietly removed and her story sanitized for centuries, then other figures in history may have suffered similar fates. Her death was not merely a historical event. It was a masterclass in secrecy manipulation and the careful construction of narrative. Ultimately, Elizabeth's final days reveal the precarious balance between power and mortality. A queen who had commanded fleets outwitted rivals and projected invincibility became, in her last months, both vulnerable and enigmatic. Her life ended under a shroud of deception, leaving the world to wonder what truly transpired in Richmond Palace in March 1603, a mystery still haunting historians today. Some accounts claim that in her final days Elizabeth's mind wandered to the past more than ever. She questioned decisions made decades earlier, replayed moments from her youth, and even conversed with deceased advisors in whispered tones. Courtiers reported hearing her address invisible figures, as if negotiating a kingdom beyond the veil of life, a haunting testament to her deteriorating state. Elizabeth's obsession with portraits escalated further. She demanded paintings of herself be repositioned repeatedly, sometimes dozens of times a day. These portraits, representing moments of triumph and beauty long gone, became her counselors, her witnesses, and her judges. The ritual of conversing with them blurred the line between devotion and delusion. Food became another arena of control and paranoia. Elizabeth, always cautious about what she consumed, grew increasingly suspicious of poisoning. Only dishes prepared by a trusted cook would pass her scrutiny, and each plate had to be tasted first by a rotating circle of courtiers. Even those selected tasters were carefully watched, a reflection of her fractured trust in those around her. Her nighttime wanderings became legendary. Guards reported seeing her in the gardens at odd hours, clad in nightgowns, searching for something invisible, or seeking the happiness she believed had slipped from her grasp. Each outing was a fragment of a queen, unraveling an image that would disturb those who observed her in silence. The breaking point occurred in February 1603. During a court session, Elizabeth suddenly rose and danced alone for 20 minutes, swaying and spinning as if moved by a private rhythm. Courtiers watched in horrified silence, unsure whether to intervene. When the performance ended, she looked around with genuine confusion and asked, "Why is everyone staring at me?" Her inner circle intensified their management protocols, controlling her movements and interactions. By early March, Elizabeth had relocated to Richmond Palace for what would be her final performance. The official story of her death, quiet prayer, peaceful decline began to crumble under scrutiny. Witnesses offered conflicting accounts. Letters and memoirs reveal an Elizabeth both enraged and fragile, speaking to the unseen, asserting authority over shadows and memories. March 18th marked her first admission of illness in months. She reportedly pointed to her throat and said, "I am not well." Yet 3 witnesses recorded different final words. Robert Cecil claimed she said, "all my possessions for a moment of time." Lady Scrow insisted it was, "I wish not to live any longer." Another attendant swore she said nothing at all. This discrepancy fueled suspicions about the truth being manipulated. The official timeline of her death is riddled with inconsistencies. Elizabeth supposedly died around 3 Sirat a.m. on March 24th, yet the public announcement was delayed until 11 Sirat a.m. During those 8 hours, the palace was sealed. No one entered or left her chambers except a select few. Her body was immediately prepared for burial by only 6 individuals, with no independent medical examination or autopsy conducted, highly unusual for a monarch of her stature. Her windows, which she had ordered sealed due to fear of the night air, were found wide open after her death. Who had opened them, and why? These small details suggest manipulation, raising the chilling possibility that Elizabeth's death scene was staged, every element designed to support a narrative of peaceful passing while hiding something far darker. Robert Cecil's actions in the immediate aftermath suggest premeditation and strategic control. By noon on March 24th, dispatches to Scotland announced James VI's succession with documents already prepared weeks in advance. Elizabeth's private physician, Dr. John Dee, who had documented her strange symptoms, died suddenly 3 days later. Lady Scrowe's damning letters were reversed conveniently, aligning with Cecil's official account. The cover-up was meticulous, leaving historians to piece together fragments centuries later. Elizabeth's private chambers were systematically gutted and renovated within a week of her death. Tapestries, furniture, and personal items were either destroyed or relocated. This went far beyond normal protocol for a royal transition. Every trace of her last days, every clue that could contradict the official narrative was carefully erased. Several key witnesses simply vanished from historical records. Sir Thomas Heneage, present during Elizabeth's final weeks, disappeared from all court documents after March 1603. His estate quietly absorbed by the crown, his family silenced. Such disappearances only deepened the air of suspicion, suggesting a network of control and intimidation designed to safeguard the narrative. The official announcement of her death, when analyzed by modern historians, reveals anachronisms and impossibilities. Quotes attributed to her do not match witness accounts. Conversations described could not have occurred in the sequence presented. The story was carefully curated to create a version of Elizabeth's passing that was palatable, heroic, and serene. Cecil's masterstroke was the funeral itself. The most elaborate royal funeral in English history, with a procession lasting hours and costing a fortune, drew public attention away from questions about her death. The spectacle celebrated her life, effectively distracting the nation from the inconsistencies surrounding her final days at Richmond Palace. It took historians over 4 centuries to begin noticing these inconsistencies. For decades, the narrative of Elizabeth dying peacefully in her sleep was accepted without question. Yet the letters, private notes, and sudden deaths surrounding her passing hint at something far more sinister and calculated than natural decline. Theories about what really killed Elizabeth abound. Mercury poisoning from her makeup and white face paint is the most widely accepted. Chronic exposure to mercury and lead would have caused tremors, paranoia, insomnia, and neurological breakdown symptoms that match her reported behavior in the last years of her life. Her blackened fingernails, once thought merely a sign of aging, align with mercury poisoning. Even her conversations with portraits could have been hallucinations induced by the toxic substances she applied daily. The very beauty regimen designed to maintain her illusion of youth may have been simultaneously accelerating her mental and physical decline. Renovations at Richmond Palace in 1999 uncovered a hidden chamber beneath Elizabeth's former rooms. Inside were bottles containing traces of arsenic, antimony, and other poisons. The discovery was classified and removed from public view, fueling speculation that evidence of deliberate poisoning had been hidden for centuries to prevent scandal. Other historians suggest assisted suicide may have played a role. Letters between Cecil and his associates hinted plans to end Elizabeth's suffering. Facing complete mental collapse, aware of the political chaos her death would unleash, the Queen herself may have chosen to exit life on her own terms with subtle help from those closest to her. A darker possibility involves radical religious factions within her court. Elizabeth's Protestant reforms had powerful enemies. Some evidence points to Puritans accelerating her demise to install a more compliant monarch. The 8-hour gap between her death and the official announcement provided time to stage the scene and eliminate evidence, ensuring that the Queen's death appeared natural and peaceful. Elizabeth's body showed signs of rapid decomposition when finally viewed by independent witnesses days after her death. Natural decline could not account for this sudden decay, but certain types of Renaissance-era poisons could. The unnerving speed of deterioration hinted at a deliberate act hidden beneath layers of official narrative. The Spanish ambassador's preemptive letter becomes more sinister upon close examination. He described specific details of how the succession would be handled before the Queen's death was publicly announced. This implies not just foreknowledge, but potentially coordination with intelligence networks, foreign or domestic, that anticipated or facilitated the Queen's final moments. The 8-hour gap between Elizabeth's death and the public announcement allowed time for meticulous scene staging. Windows previously sealed at her command were mysteriously opened. Personal effects were removed. Letters and documents were forged or intercepted. Every detail orchestrated to maintain the image of a serene passing, while erasing troubling evidence. Robert Cecil and his associates moved with surgical precision. By noon on March 24th, dispatches were already en route to Scotland with pre-prepared succession documents confirming James VI's succession. The timing was impeccable, ensuring the smooth transition of power and reinforcing the carefully crafted illusion that Elizabeth's death was natural and inevitable. Elizabeth's private physician, Dr. John Dee, who had meticulously documented her mysterious symptoms, died 3 days after her passing under the guise of heart failure. Conveniently, he was one of the few who could have contradicted Cecil's narrative. His sudden death removed a potential witness, further tightening control over the Queen's final story. Lady Scrow, who had written damning private letters about Elizabeth's erratic behavior, recanted her statements shortly afterward. Her family's debts were forgiven, and her son received a lucrative court appointment. The rapid alignment of her testimony with Cecil's official account suggests the use of subtle coercion or incentives to enforce a narrative favorable to the ruling elite. By the end of March 1603, Elizabeth's chambers letters and personal items were either destroyed or permanently relocated. The palace's renovation erased all traces of her final days, making independent verification nearly impossible. Anyone attempting to uncover the truth would face a void of evidence carefully engineered to protect the legacy of power. Even her funeral was part of the operation. Lavish, elaborate, and publicly consuming attention, it shifted focus from the uncomfortable questions surrounding her death to a spectacle celebrating her reign. The orchestration of grief and ceremony became a masterful act of historical misdirection, ensuring that the public remembered Elizabeth as a powerful, serene queen, rather than a deteriorating, possibly poisoned monarch. The cumulative effect of these maneuvers kept historians and the public in the dark for over 400 years. Letters, coded communication, sudden deaths, and strategic misdirection created a historical smokescreen. Only centuries later, with forensic analysis and archival research, did the inconsistencies and eerie patterns begin to emerge, revealing a chilling truth. Elizabeth's final act was not peaceful surrender to old age. It was a complex tableau of political intrigue, toxic indulgence, psychological collapse, and meticulous cover-up. Her death stands as one of the most calculated in European history, a masterclass in controlling a narrative, manipulating witnesses, and orchestrating power transitions. The Virgin Queen, who had ruled with an iron fist, met her end in a shadowy dance between illusion and reality, leaving behind a story that only now, centuries later, is beginning to reveal its true horror.